The rain fell on the city of Aethelburg not as a gentle shower, but as a relentless, gray sheet that turned the bustling streets into a blur of smeared headlights and glistening asphalt. It was a weather that spoke of endings, not beginnings. And in the shadow of a towering overpass, huddled in a cardboard-lined alcove, was a boy named Leo. At just 10 years old, his world had shrunk to the size of this small, damp space. His jacket was too thin, his shoes were split at the seams, and the cold had settled deep into his bones, a constant companion to the hollow ache in his stomach. His most prized possession, clutched in his small, grimy hand, was a small, smooth gray stone. It was unremarkable to anyone else, but to Leo it was a compass. His grandmother, before the sickness took her, had pressed it into his palm. Her voice, frail but firm, had whispered, "When you have nothing left, Leo, take this to the Aethelburg Trust. Ask for Mr. Sterling. It's not much, but it's everything." She had passed a day later, leaving him alone in a world that was too big and too cruel. For weeks, he had been too scared, too proud, too lost. But today, with the rain washing the city clean and the hunger a sharp, insistent pain, he had no other options left. The stone felt warm in his hand, a tiny ember of a promise made. With a resolve that belied his small frame, he pushed himself up and began the long, wet walk towards the financial district. The Aethelburg Trust was not a bank of glass and light, but one of old, formidable granite, a fortress of money and tradition. Its doors were heavy oak, banded with iron, and they seemed to swallow the sound of the city outside. As Leo pushed one open, the transition was jarring. The chaotic symphony of rain and traffic was replaced by a profound, reverent silence, broken only by the soft ticking of a giant, antique clock and the hushed murmur of voices from behind polished mahogany desks. The air smelled of lemon polish, old leather, and wealth. Leo stood dripping on the immense Persian rug, a small, shivering island in a sea of quiet opulence. He felt 100 eyes upon him, well-dressed men and women who glanced up from their ledgers and computer screens, their expressions a mixture of curiosity, distaste, and faint alarm. He was an anomaly, a smudge of the harsh outside world on their pristine canvas. In a corner office with a view of the rain-swept city, Alastair Finch presided over this kingdom of quiet money. He was a man carved from the same granite as his bank, with silver hair, an impeccably tailored three-piece suit, and a reputation for being as unyielding as a vault door. He was reviewing a complex merger proposal, his mind occupied with figures in the tens of millions. The sudden, subtle shift in the room's atmosphere drew his gaze. He looked up and saw the boy. His first instinct was not pity, but irritation. A security lapse, an inconvenience. He watched as the boy approached the nearest desk, where a young, kind-faced teller named Clara was stationed. Leo didn't speak. He simply opened his hand and placed the small, gray stone on the polished wood between them. Clara, to her credit, didn't scoff or shoo him away. She looked from the stone to the boy's desperate, hopeful eyes. I need to see Mr. Sterling," Leo whispered, his voice barely audible. "My grandmother," she said to give him this. Alastair Finch, who had been about to signal for security, froze. Sterling. The name was a ghost in this bank, a legend from a bygone era. Mr. Alastair Sterling, his own grandfather and the bank's founder, had been dead for 15 years. A slow, cold curiosity began to replace his irritation. He stood, the legs of his chair scraping softly on the floor, and walked over, his footsteps silent on the thick carpet. "Can I help you, young man?" Alastair's voice was calm, but it carried an authority that made Leo flinch. Clara looked up, nervous. "Mr. Finch, he's asking for Mr. Sterling. He has this." Alastair picked up the stone. It was smooth, cool, utterly ordinary, yet his grandfather had been an eccentric, a man of cryptic messages and old-world sentimentality. He remembered stories half forgotten about his grandfather's keystones. A thought, wild and improbable, began to form in his mind. "Come with me," Alastair said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He led the bewildered Leo past the staring employees into the heart of the bank, the old vault room. This was where the bank kept its most valuable physical assets and its historical archives. The air was even cooler here, smelling of aged paper and cold metal. Against one wall stood a magnificent, floor-to-ceiling mosaic of the Aethelburg city crest, made from thousands of colored stones. It was the bank's centerpiece, a testament to its history. Alistair stopped in front of it, the gray stone in his hand. He studied the mosaic, his eyes tracing its intricate patterns, and then he saw it. Near the bottom, in the depiction of the city's foundation, was a single missing stone, a perfect gray-shaped void. A hush fell over the small group of senior staff who had followed them, sensing that something momentous was unfolding. Alistair, his heart beating a strange, unsteady rhythm, knelt. He carefully fitted Leo's stone into the empty space. There was a soft, deep click, a sound of precision machinery that hadn't been activated in decades. A hidden seam appeared in the wall beside the mosaic, and a small, perfectly preserved safety deposit box, no larger than a shoebox, slid silently out from a concealed compartment. The silence in the room was absolute. Alistair looked at Leo, then back at the box. He used a key from his own chain to unlock it. Inside, there was no stack of bonds or pile of gold. Instead, there was a single yellowed envelope and a small, antique key on a faded velvet fob. With trembling fingers, a sight none of his employees had ever witnessed, Alistair opened the envelope. The letter inside was in his grandfather's familiar, elegant script. To the bearer of this stone, if you are reading this, then you are in a time of great need, and you were loved by Elinor. Elinor was the nurse who cared for my dear wife, Isabella, in her final days. When I was lost in grief, it was Elinor who reminded me of the world's kindness. She refused any payment, asking only that if her family ever found themselves in dire circumstances, I might extend a hand. This key opens safe deposit box 117, held in perpetuity. Within it, I have placed not a fortune of money, but a fortune of opportunity. The deeds to the old Hearthfire Bookshop on Elm Street and the apartment above it are yours. The shop's accounts were seeded with a small fund that has, I hope, grown. But more importantly, it is a place, a home, a business, a future. Do not see this as charity. See it as an investment in a story that kindness began, and which you are now destined to continue. With hope, Alistair Sterling. Tears were streaming down Clara's face. The other bankers stood in stunned silence. Alistair Finch felt the foundations of his own world shift. He had spent his life amassing digital wealth, playing games of financial conquest. But his grandfather had built a legacy of a different kind, one of human connection, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right person to unlock it. He looked at Leo, who was staring at the key, his young mind struggling to comprehend the magnitude of what was happening. The boy wasn't just a homeless urchin, he was the inheritor of a promise, the central character in a story his grandmother had set in motion with her simple, profound kindness. Leo, Alistair said, his voice softer than it had been in years. How would you like to see your new home? The journey to Elm Street was made in Alistair's silent luxury car. The rain had finally stopped, and the setting sun broke through the clouds, setting the wet streets ablaze with gold. They stopped in front of a charming, if slightly dusty, little shop with a bowed front window and the words Hearthfire Bookshop painted in faded gold lettering on the glass. The key turned smoothly in the lock. The air inside was warm and smelled of old paper, beeswax, and possibility. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny fairies. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling. A spiral staircase led to a cozy apartment above, filled with sturdy, old furniture and a warmth that Leo had forgotten existed. But the final miracle was in the back office. A modern computer terminal, set up by the bank to manage the property, was still active. Alistair, his expertise now put to a purpose he truly believed in for the first time, called up the bookshop's investment portfolio. This small fund, Alastair Sterling had mentioned had been quietly, diligently managed by the bank's own systems for decades. It was now worth over $2 million. Leo wasn't just the owner of a bookshop, he was its guardian, its future. Alastair didn't just assign financial advisors, he became one himself. He contacted social services, navigating the bureaucracy with a ferocity that surprised even him, to have Leo properly placed under the bank's guardianship until a more permanent, loving arrangement could be made, with Alastair himself as the primary reference. He ensured the bookshop would be restored, its shelves stocked, its future secured. As Leo stood in the middle of his new home, running his small hand over the spine of a leather-bound book, the gray stone, now back in his pocket, felt no longer like a last hope, but like a cornerstone. The world was still big, but it was no longer cruel. It was a place where a grandmother's love could be woven into a stone, and a stranger's gratitude could build a fortress of hope, waiting in the silence of a bank vault. The story of the boy with the stone and the banker who found his heart became a quiet legend in Aethelburg. And Alastair Finch, the man of granite, learned that the most valuable assets are not always on a balance sheet. Sometimes they are found in the eyes of a child, unlocking a treasure that changes both their lives forever. If this story found a place in your heart, please remember to like, comment, and share Kindness Soul Stories. Your support helps us tell more tales that remind us of the miracles hidden in plain sight. Before you go, we have a question for you. What legacy of kindness would you want to leave behind for a generation you may never meet? As Leo lit the small, gas fireplace in the bookshop for the first time, watching the flames dance and chase away the last of the chill, he understood. His grandmother hadn't just left him a building or money, she had left him a hearth, and he knew, with a certainty that warmed him from the inside out, that his life was no longer a story of survival, but one of stories, warmth, and a future built on a foundation of love.